Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I want to welcome you to tonight's very important programming as part of this being April Alcohol Awareness Month. I'm so glad you could join us. I know there are many demands on your time this time of year, and I appreciate your coming. Special thanks to all of our sponsors who make this programming possible. We couldn't do it without you. And our ask of all of the participants who are joining us now or will be watching the recording later, please do share this resource. The Glenbard Parent Series is free to everyone anywhere. If you're a social media person, like us on Facebook, check out our Instagram, tell your cousin in Poughkeepsie and your mother who lives in Rockford. Everybody is always welcome. So thank you for that. Let me tell you about some upcoming program. I should say the last upcoming program. Next, in the first week of May, we will be having our final program of this year. Mary Dell Harrington and Lisa Heffernan have written this very important book called Grown and Flown: How to Support Your Teens, Stay Close as a Family, and Raise Independent Adults. So if you know someone that would be finding this program useful, please do share it. We thank you for that. That'll be on May 3rd at 7 p.m. The lineup for next year is equally strong, and I really hope once you see that on our website, you'll circle your calendar and once again share. So the format tonight, I'll be turning things over in a few minutes to Jordan. She'll introduce our three speakers. You'll hear from them, and then we've got some students who are ready to ask some questions, and we hope you'll have a question as well. Time permitting, we'll get to all of them. Please enter it in the Q&A or in the chat. So again, thank you. Thanks the sponsors. I hope to see you back next year and next week as well. Jordan Esser is the initiatives coordinator and the director of the prevention leadership team of the DuPage County Health Department. They are one of our important sponsors. I want to thank them for that support, making this all possible. Jordan, please take it away.
Thanks, Gilda, and welcome everybody. Like Gilda said, I'm the project coordinator of the DuPage County Prevention Leadership Team. We are the Substance Use Prevention Coalition for the DuPage County Health Department, serving all of DuPage. We are a proud sponsor and partner of the Glenbard Parent Series. We are especially excited for tonight's program. For more information on the coalition or tips to how to talk to your teens about substance use and prevention, you can visit our website at dupageplt.org. And now I'm very excited to introduce our speakers. Our keynote tonight is Stephen Hill, founder of Speak Sobriety. He is a young person in recovery, best-selling author, recovery coach, and a fierce attorney advocating for treatment over incarceration. He is a national speaker on substance use and prevention and mental health awareness, and he has a truly inspiring comeback story that you're going to hear tonight. Stephen has presented in front of thousands of people, sharing his story of addiction to recovery and beyond. He leaves people better educated, feeling hopeful, and motivated to make smart choices and positive change. Today, he is living out his passion, speaking sobriety to youth and adults across the country. You will also hear from two panelists after Stephen tonight. Dr. Aaron Weiner is a licensed board-certified psychologist and a master addictions counselor. He is also a clinician, author, and frequent speaker on addiction treatment and issues. As a practicing addiction psychologist, he specializes in the treatment of individuals suffering from the consequences of drug or alcohol use or behavioral addictions. And finally, you will also hear from Dr. Doug Bolton. He received his PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Vermont and completed an internship at Lurie's Children's Hospital. He has worked in therapeutic schools as a school psychologist and a principal. He is currently in private practice at Formative Psychological Services. We are delighted to welcome them all to tonight's special GPS and Prevention Leadership Team event. So Stephen, go ahead and take it away.
The hardest part about addiction for me was being in a position where my life was a complete disaster and I wholeheartedly wanted to stop using, but I had absolutely no control to stop the show. I actually got to a point towards the end where I accepted my fate as prison and eventually dead.
For the first time ever, more than 100,000 deadly overdoses were recorded in the U.S.
A 13-year-old boy has now died after he was exposed to fentanyl.
Local law enforcement is bracing for the problems that could come with legalized marijuana. Federal law still classifies marijuana as an illegal controlled substance on par with heroin.
Experts are now calling vaping an epidemic.
Teens are being hospitalized with lifelong injuries, all because they're inhaling too much, too often.
Many students are using prescription drugs to try to gain an advantage studying.
Underage drinking is a problem nationwide.
So Michael, who's 16 months older than Stephen, they were like very different, you know, but still always hung out together and great friends. And then Stephen came along, and from a young age, we knew that, you know, he that's all he wanted to do was play sports. You know, like in one season, he could be playing, you know, baseball, lacrosse, hockey.
So I would say it was good going into the time period when Stephen started becoming different and behaving irrationally during his junior year of high school. And when he started smoking pot and then using opioids, his grades in school went down and his whole attitude changed, and he was defiant and didn't think we had any right to tell him what to do.
And I remember him just screaming at my parents, and they were just getting into these huge fights, and he was, you know, partially in denial that he was having a problem.
So Stephen got kicked off of his suffering hockey team, which made him refuse to go to school.
So what's he gonna do after school? Where his whole life, that's all he did was after school play sports. So now again, here he is. So who does he starts finding kids to hang out with what are they doing at 2:15? They're just going to get high somewhere, and, you know, because he wasn't the kid who was coming home and reading.
And I remember he punched a hole in his bedroom wall at one point, out of the anger of my parents trying to help him and him saying that. And it just felt like it was spiraling out of control at that point.
I came home from school, and apparently there had been some kind of fight between Stephen and my parents, and he had slammed the door on his way out, and so our side door's glass was shattered. And he just kind of laughed and thought the whole thing was hilarious and showed us a bunch of money that he had, and then just walked out of the house. And so you could just tell that he was in a completely different mindset, that it wasn't the same person that we grew up with.
Then later on, it became less of anger and more just like he was out of it, and like I couldn't communicate with him, and it was that was scary in its own way. Like I felt like he wasn't there.
I think if you would have known Steve during that time, you would have thought he was a terrible person. And like now I've gotten used to when someone's judging someone, like, you know, he stays home all the time, he just drinks alone, like he's a loser, that type of stuff. Like it gives you perspective to never think like that anymore. Doesn't seem that it should have happened to Steve. Like had a great life growing up, great support from his parents. Like we were always there for him, but it's just like it can happen to anyone.
Everywhere he went, I went with him. He went to a treatment facility in California. I went out there with him.
There's 4 of us, so it's hard enough for them to, you know, equalize their time amongst us. And when one of them is demanding their attention because he's at a point where he could die, you know, obviously that takes precedent, and there's really no argument.
All his trips to the Karen Foundation, at the Mountainside, you know, every court date.
Kids or adults who don't have the support, you know, they just can, you know, either they're overdosing or they're living in the streets, and, you know, and then their life never gets on track.
And you see the amount of friends he's had like overdose or die related to drugs and stuff like that. It's just like it's a miracle. Like you should just be thankful that if you can go through like whatever it was, like an 8-year period of being on and off drugs, that you come out on the other side. It's just like, you know, you're in the 1%.
Looking back on it, he needed our support. That was the only way that he was going to be able to get through this.
You know, Stephen's life got on track because we helped him so much get on track. I mean, he did it in the end, you know, he did what he needed to do, but I was never one to say, you know, yeah, he just kick him out and he needs to hit rock bottom. And, you know, I was more about the more support and the more help we can get for him. That's how he's gonna make it, and he did.
So much of my life can be summed up into a first choice and a second chance. A choice I made my freshman year of high school to pick up that first drink, to pick up that first drug, which would change my life forever and lead me down that dark path of drug addiction where I learned the meaning of true pain, stigma, and struggle. But that same struggle is what made me the man who I am today. Finding a way out of that struggle is what gave me a real second chance at life. I found a way to take my mess and I turned it into a message. And this is the story of my journey to recovery. And now with a story like mine, it is very easy to focus on the ending of my addiction where things were just a complete disaster. But in order for there to be that ending, there had to be a beginning. So where did this all start for me? When I was in 8th grade, I had made the junior varsity lacrosse team. So I was a middle school student playing a high school sport. So at the end of the day, I was getting bused over to the high school and I was practicing with freshmen, sophomores, even a few juniors. And I heard a lot of them talking about drinking, about smoking, going to parties. I was curious. I was definitely the type of student that was drawn to that. Now, I didn't use anything when I was in middle school, but as soon as I got into high school, that would change. Where I went to high school, it would always start on the first or second Wednesday in September. And at the time, it was kind of a tradition that the seniors would throw a big party for the whole school on that first Friday. So me and a few of my friends went to this party. It was at the back entrance of this park. There were about 6 kegs of beer there. Half the school was there. There were people drinking, others smoking. I knew what I was getting myself into, but I guess what really surprised me was the people that I saw doing it. Some of them were captains of different sports teams. Kids I grew up with, I knew came from supportive families, did well in school. And so I just thought to myself, this just must be the way things go in high school. I'll drink and smoke a little bit on the weekends. I'll still do well in school. I'll play sports. I'll graduate, and then I'll go off to college. That night, I had met a girl who was a senior, and she had dated one of my older friends. And a few weeks later, that same girl came into our school the morning of our pep rally. There were about 1,500 students in my high school, and we had this pep rally at the beginning of October where everyone would pile into the gym, the band would play, we did all this stuff for school spirit. It was supposed to be a really good time. But what the administration didn't know on that morning was that some of the seniors started drinking early in the morning before school, and a few of them brought in water bottles filled with vodka. So these 3 girls, they had been drinking all morning throughout the pep rally, which ended just before lunchtime. Seniors were allowed to drive. So these 3 girls, they walk out to the high school parking lot, they're all drunk, they get in a convertible, pull out, they're going down the road, lose control of it, it flips over, lands on that one girl, and she was killed. Now, I didn't know her very personally. I only met her that one time, but I had a lot of friends that were very close with her. And I do remember very well what it was like that next day in school. The hallways were just completely silent, and if it wasn't silence, it was just people crying. I don't bring up this story in a way to try and scare people. I bring up this story to remind you that you don't have to be addicted to drugs and alcohol for bad things to happen. I get that argument all the time from students, and to be honest with you, I get it from parents too. Parents who know who I am and what I do find the need to tell me that their kid vapes or they drink or they smoke marijuana, but they only do it every once in a while. I don't think they're addicted, so it's okay, right? This girl did not have a major problem with drugs or alcohol. Yes, she drank alcohol every once in a while, but she was your average student athlete, made one bad choice, and she lost her life because of it. I remember the time a lot of the sports teams got together, said, we're going to stay sober this year. We're going to do it for her. And it's sad to say that the shock of her death did not last very long, if at all. Before long, everyone's back to doing what they were doing, and I want to take part in it. My freshman year, I used nicotine, I smoked marijuana, I drank alcohol, I went to a few parties, and by the end of my freshman year, I really didn't see any negative consequences. I did well in school, I had a lot of friends, was excelling in sports, good family life, and so I just said to myself, I'm good, I'm not going to be that guy. But the summer going to my sophomore year, things started to change a little bit. I went to another party, and the new captain of my lacrosse team just comes up to me and hands me a half ounce of marijuana. It's all bagged up in individual bags, and he says to me, I want you to sell this for me. Give me this amount of money, keep the rest for yourself. I'm 14 at the time, he's 17, he's a captain, he's a senior. You can just call this classic peer pressure. I said to him, you want me to sell it for you? No problem. There were a lot of people at this party. I sold it all in a few hours. Gave him his money, he walks out to his Jeep, comes back, hands me another one. He says, you know what, I want you to keep on doing this for me. So the summer going to my sophomore year, I started selling marijuana from one of my older teammates. So now I had it all the time. Now I'm smoking all the time. Quickly, for my freshman year, having no negative consequences, that started to change my sophomore year. I failed my first class. I was ineligible to play sports because of my grades. My behavior started to change. I started hanging out with a different group of friends. Our only purpose for hanging out with each other was to get high. Everything about me was changing. The way I acted, the type of music I listened to. I listened to the type of music that glorifies violence, selling drugs, degrading women. I became very secretive. I'm locking doors everywhere I went. I became a liar. I was dishonest about almost everything. And you take all of this together, and you can see a pretty big change in someone. And it happened quickly for me. Nothing really drastic happened my sophomore year, but my junior year, under the influence of marijuana and alcohol, I tried cocaine for my first time. Then I stole a prescription for Xanax from one of my friend's moms, tried that for my first time. Got my hands on a bunch more, and these drugs just turned me into someone I am not. I became very angry. I was getting in trouble in school. I got suspended, and then I came back just in time for some tournament my school hockey team had in upstate New York. I didn't get any playing time in the first period because I had just come off a suspension. So I went in the locker room, I took off my helmet, I threw it to the ground, I threw my stick to the ground, and my coach just comes up to me and he says, if you don't want to be here, just leave. And I took him literally. Took off my equipment, put my clothes on, I stormed out. Once the game was over, I had calmed down, and I went up to him and I apologized. But he said, that was the last straw. You were kicked off the school hockey team. And then I just lost it. I started screaming at him. I cursed him off. I said some things I definitely should not have said. So if I wasn't kicked off the team before, I definitely was now. So I'm 16 years old, it's my junior year, and I had two identities. I had sports and drugs. Sports was gone, so I just dove into drugs completely. At 16 years old, I stopped going to high school. I was given 10 days out of school suspension for cursing off my coach, which, to be honest with you, at the time, I thought it was a gift. I don't have to go to school for 10 days, fine by me. All I did was fall further behind in my classes. I went to school for maybe 1 or 2 more days, and then I dropped out. Eventually, the school caught on. They called my parents. They sat me down. They were like, what are you doing? You're throwing your life away. And I just said to them, I only went to school to play sports. Sports are gone, so I'm not going back. Even some of my friends tried talking to me. I remember one of my best friends sitting across from me at my parents' kitchen table and just saying, bro, just go to school and pass. Just do that much. And I couldn't even do that. So my parents didn't know what to do with me. So a few days later, I came home really late. I fell asleep on the couch under the influence. Around 5 in the morning, I get woken up. And these 2 Marines, these military guys, are standing over me. And one of them says to me, Stephen, you are coming with us. I had no idea what was going on. Pretty much what happened was my parents had hired them, what's called sober escorts, to drag me out of my house in the middle of the night and send me to a wilderness program. For those of you that don't know what a wilderness program is, it is not a fun place to be. Pretty much what it is, a therapeutic style boot camp environment. They would scream at me, they would yell at me, then they would break me down, make me talk about my feelings. I would have to hike with these big packs on my back all day. I had to cook my food over a fire. There are no bathrooms, there are no showers. If you want to shower, they hand you a bucket of water and soap. No cell phones, nothing. I was there for almost 8 weeks. It was not a great experience. But I do remember that first night very well. That first night just laying there in this tent thinking to myself, how did I get here? It was just a year and a half, 2 years earlier. I had not even tried drugs and alcohol before. And now I'm in some program in the middle of the woods in Georgia. It happened that fast for me. And a lot of people that go to these type of programs, they don't get to go back to their old high school afterwards. They get sent to what's called a therapeutic boarding school. And I was doing everything I could to convince my parents to give me one more chance. I can only communicate with them through letters. And so I didn't find out until the day before I was set to leave that my parents were going to let me come home just in time for the start of lacrosse season my junior year. And I was really excited about it. Now, you could say at first I was scared straight a little bit. People told me I was very quiet, I was timid, which was not my personality at all. And there was this home contract that was made, and I had to follow all these rules. Rule number 1 was very plain and simple: no drugs, no alcohol. You have to be completely sober. Then I had to go to support groups, see a counselor, maintain a certain GPA. I had a curfew, all these positive things, and I was following all the rules. And then right before the lacrosse season started my junior year, the administration in my high school decided to extend my suspension from ice hockey into lacrosse season. They said they wanted to send a message to the rest of the students that if you curse off your coach or do anything like that at all, you were done with sports for the entire school year. I remember this meeting took place at the end of the school day, and I'm standing in the hallway watching all my friends get on the bus to go to practice, and I had to go home, thinking to myself, I am never going to get out from under this reputation as this bad kid. My father always talked about reputation growing up and how important it really is. And it became very clear to me on that day what he was trying to tell me. So instead of playing sports after school, I was hanging out with people who were getting high. Eventually, I relapsed, started this all over again. I went into my senior year of high school, and for a short period of time, I was kind of flying under the radar, meaning I was still using drugs and alcohol, but I was showing up to school, I was passing all my classes, I wasn't getting into trouble. And so I thought to myself, okay, I let it get out of control once, but now I can control it. Right before hockey season started my senior year, I got a phone call from one of my friends early in the morning that changed my life forever. He said to me, my sister just got her wisdom teeth pulled. The doctor prescribed her 30 oxycodone, opioid painkillers. She only took 1 or 2 pills. So we decided to steal the prescription and said, let's try it. So me and 2 of my friends, we smoked marijuana before school, and we each took a few of these oxycodone painkillers. One of my friends, he took it. Within 15 minutes, he started throwing up. It made him nauseous. He hated the way it made him feel. Another one of my friends took it. He liked it, but didn't think it was anything that great. Me, I took it. I remember walking the back of math class and sitting down when this feeling came over me, and I just thought to myself, this is what I'm looking for. I want this feeling, and I want it all the time. You get 3 different people take the same drug, and you get 3 different reactions. Why did it make my friend nauseous, and why did I get addicted to the feeling instantly? I can't tell you that for sure. It just shows that everybody is different. That's either a risk that you are willing or not willing to take. Now, my opioid addiction didn't get out of control right away my senior year, simply because I didn't have access to them all that much. That would change as soon as I got out of high school, but they made me try out for the ice hockey team again my senior year, and I was put on the last line. I'm on the first line as a sophomore. Now I'm on the last line as a senior. Obviously, I'm going in the wrong direction here. I got in another argument with my coach, nothing crazy this time, but they were looking for any excuse not to let me play, and I gave it to them. He reported to the administration that we got in an argument, and they decided that they were not going to let me play sports my senior year. My parents started freaking out. They knew without sports, there was a good chance I would just drop out of high school, I wouldn't graduate. And so we did something pretty crazy. I don't have time to explain exactly how we did this, but I ended up switching high schools halfway through my senior year, playing on a different school hockey team against all my friends back on my old high school. It was an insane experience, and I am forever grateful to the coaches, to my teammates, to the parents. The parents had a big meeting about it before I moved over there, and one of the parents stood up and said, "What do we want with this throwaway?" Why do we want this student who got kicked off the team from another school district to come in here as a senior and take the spot of one of our own players? But they didn't do that, and they took me in, and I had an amazing experience there. And I truly believe I would not have graduated high school if I didn't have an opportunity to play. Once that season was over, I ended up going back to my old high school the last semester, my senior year, and I decided to not even play lacrosse. Lacrosse was my favorite sport. I played it every single year since I was in third grade. I was very good at it. And at the height of my athletic career, I just threw it all away for drugs and alcohol. I did graduate high school, but barely. And I can't just sit here and blame other people for what happened to me. I have to take responsibility for my own actions. At the end of the day, I let drugs and alcohol get in the way of my success. I went to a community college in upstate New York. I simply was not ready for it. I went to college in August. By the time it was October, I had failed out. All I did there was party. Now I'm 18 years old. I had to move back home with my parents. I'm not in school. I'm not working. And now I developed a serious opioid habit. And so I got involved in dealing drugs, and no longer on a small level. And so naturally, the police came into my life. At 18 years old, I was arrested for my first time for possession of marijuana. About a month later, I got arrested again for possession of marijuana, possession of a controlled substance, was caught with a few opioid painkillers. Then I was sent to my first 28-day inpatient program for drug and alcohol treatment. I did this from age 18 to 24. I would get arrested, I would go into treatment, I would come out, and then I would do it all over again. Except each time my criminal charges were getting more serious. My drug habit was getting more serious. And what I didn't know when I got out of that first treatment program, this was about much more than simply not using drugs and alcohol. I had to change my thinking, the way I acted, the people I hung out with, the place I went, and the things I did. And I was not ready to make those changes. How do I even make those changes at 18 years old? Almost all my friends were doing it. So instead, I surrounded myself with negative influence and temptation. And every time would lead me back, but each time was worse than the next. Throughout the next 6 or 7 years, I made a lot of bad choices. When I was 19, I called out of work one day, got on the back of a four-wheeler with somebody I just should not have been in the back of a four-wheeler with. There were three of us. I was in the back of the two-man. My other friend was in the single. We're driving to the woods. We get to the bottom of this cliff. You go up and you go to the right, you go down nice and easy. You go to the left, the cliff just drops off. But you can't see that until you get up there. My friend on the right, he went down nice and easy. Me and my other friend, we went to the left. We were going full speed. By the time we got to the top of the cliff, it was too late. We went flying off, and I compound fractured my right femur bone, which means my thigh bone was cracked in half and sticking out of my body. I was in the middle of the woods. It was January. It was freezing cold outside, and I was in a really bad spot. I'm very lucky to be alive today. I'm very lucky I could even walk today. Two of my friends since elementary school that were now paramedics in the area, they came there and they literally saved my life. They tried calling a helicopter at first, but there were too many trees in the way. So one of my friends went home, got his personal truck, was literally backing over trees, got me out of there, and they saved my life. But I was in a wheelchair for 4 months. I couldn't walk. I was not fully healed for about 15 months. And at the beginning, I was in excruciating pain. And this is one of those situations where I was prescribed opioid painkillers, and I really needed them. Now, I used to use this as what I would call my socially acceptable excuse as to why I got addicted to opioids. I would tell people I got in a really bad accident, the doctor prescribed me too many, and that's how I got addicted. But it's not really true. I was high in opioids after I made that horrible choice. And after the doctor prescribed them to me, I was more than doubling and tripling my dose by buying them illegally on the street. I went for my first follow-up appointment with this doctor, and I think she's going to prescribe me more. But she said, you don't need these anymore, just take Advil and Tylenol. I walk out of that appointment, I call my drug dealer immediately. I said to him, listen, man, I really need some opioid painkillers right now. He said, I'm not gonna have anything for a few days, but you can try calling around. I couldn't find anything. So I've been misusing and abusing these pills for months, and all of a sudden I just stopped. And it was around 36 hours went by, and I'm sitting there in the wheelchair next to my friend, and I said to him, I don't know, man, I'm starting to feel sick. I feel like I have the flu or something. He shakes his head and he looks at me and he says, you don't have the flu, you're dope sick. I said, dope sick, what does that even mean? He says, you're physically addicted to opioids, and because you stopped using, you're going through withdrawals. But check this. I know a guy. I'll go on the street. I'll buy this pill called Oxycontin. I'll bring it back. I'll break it up. You'll snort it, and that sick feeling will go away almost instantly. Honestly, I didn't believe him. I just thought I had the flu or something, but he said he was going to fix my problem. I gave him some money. He went in the street. He bought me this pill Oxycontin, brought it back, broke it up, said, snort it. I did it. And that sick feeling was gone almost instantly. And that was the first time I realized that I was physically addicted to opioids, and drugs like that will take you down very, very quickly. It's progressive. At the height of my addiction, I had a 900 milligram a day habit. On the street, it was going for as much as $1 a milligram. That's $900 a day. How does somebody afford a drug habit like that? Well, that's why I got involved in dealing drugs, illegal gambling, things I think about today I cannot even believe I was involved in. But when your brain is addicted, when your body is addicted, you don't think about the consequences. You don't think about how your actions are hurting other people. And because it's so expensive, this is the reason why people turn to heroin, because it's cheaper and it's readily available, except today it's laced with a powerful substance called fentanyl. And now drug cartels are pressing their own pills. Kids think they're getting one thing, turns out to be fentanyl, and people are just overdosing and dying at an alarming rate. It is truly the most dangerous time in history to be using drugs because of fentanyl. If I had been using the way I was years ago today, I would no longer be with us 100%. Once I got to that point in my addiction, I basically lost all of my friends, and then I lost my family too. My parents were the last ones to go. My mom sat me down. My dad was standing behind her, and she said to me, you need to leave our house today, right now. Until you are ready to go away and get long-term help, do not call us. Do not call anybody in this family. Leave today. Goodbye. So I left, ended up getting my own apartment in New Jersey, and I was involved in criminal activity at a level at this point. I just had a feeling something very bad was going to happen, and it did. Christmas Eve of 2011, I come home to my apartment. There's about 10 police cars in front of it. I think they're there to arrest me, which they were, but it was much worse than that. Growing up when I was a kid, I had this friend, and we were told by our parents to never get in the car with his father. When we were little kids, we didn't know why, but as we got older, we found out he was addicted to crack cocaine. He found out where I lived, knew I had drugs and money in my home, came there with two other guys. One guy had a knife, the other one had a bat. They had duct tape and rope. Their plan was to break into my apartment, steal my drugs and my money. If they couldn't find it, wait for me to get home, beat me, tie me up, and make me tell them where it is. Now, even at my worst, I was not a violent person. I really didn't associate with violent people, but you get involved in drugs and you have no idea what's coming through that door. I was very lucky I wasn't home that night. They broke my back window. My neighbor heard it. She called 911. Police got there very quickly, caught them, but gave them what's also called exigent circumstances, which means they went in there and they knew who I was and they found all my drugs and all my money. And now I was being charged at the felony level. I say this to kids every time I speak. You want to go off, you want to have a good job, you want to have a career, you get that criminal record tied to you and it can haunt you for the rest of your life. I have a friend who went to Yale and Wharton Business School and can't get a job in the industry he wants because of his criminal record. My situation's a little bit different. I was arrested in New Jersey where the laws are a little bit more lenient. I could have my charges expunged, erased from my record after a certain period of time. But it's a very long, painful, and expensive process that I'm still going through to this day. And I did have to plead guilty to a felony. I remember that day in court. If someone were to tell me at 13 years old when this all started, that by the time I was 24, I'd be a convicted felon, I would have laughed at you. And if you told me 100% that this is where it was going, I would have never started in the first place. I was put on felony probation. I was being drug tested, monitored by the state. I had a probation officer, and it still wasn't enough for me to stop because I just kept hanging around the same people, doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes during a Q&A, I've been asked, what was the lowest moment in your addiction? And for me, it was being on felony probation in New Jersey, staying at my parents' house in New York, just sitting there with my grandmother when all of a sudden the police kick in the door, arrest me again on more felony drug charges right in front of my grandmother, handcuff me, walk me out in front of all the neighbors. And the craziest part about that day for me was that I didn't even really care. I didn't care. I was so broken and lost at that point that I had pretty much accepted my fate as prison and eventually death. But this was 3 weeks before my older brother's wedding. It was supposed to be a really happy time for my family, and here I am again, just messing it up for everyone. I got bailed out of jail on September 28, 2012. And on September 29, 2012, at around 3 in the morning, I took my last drink and my last drug. My sobriety date is September 30th, 2012. At the time, did I think it was going to be my last drink and drug? I really wasn't sure, but I wasn't left with many options. I had to be back in the treatment program by Monday morning. Otherwise, I was being remanded to jail. I walked back into this treatment program. I had been there about 9 months earlier, and my old counselor was just standing at the door waiting for my arrival. And I see him, and I put my head down in shame. He tells me to pick my head up, and he looks at me, and he says, "Are you ready?" And for the first time in my life, I just stopped fighting. I surrendered. And I said to him, "Please just tell me what to do, because clearly I have no idea." I had been to about 6 or 7 28-day inpatient programs at this point, so it was clear I needed long-term treatment. So he sent me to a year-long program with 3 different phases, which pretty much just means as you progress through the phases, you get more and more freedom. And it wasn't until around month 5 or 6 of being in this program that I was going about my day. It was around lunchtime, I realized that when I woke up that morning, drugs wasn't the first thing on my mind. Every single morning, I woke up with the same thought process. Do I have drugs? Okay. If not, how am I going to get them? But around month 5 or 6, I didn't have that thought. I met with my case manager. I told him, and he smiled back at me. He said, "This is when recovery is really going to start working for you. So give it your best shot." On that day, I made a choice. I made a choice to give myself a real second chance at life, knowing how hard this was going to be for me. But because I prepared myself for how hard it was going to be, and I was willing to ask for help, and I had that support there with me, it actually made it a little bit easier. I decided to start eating a little bit healthier. I went back to the gym. I was exercising, lifting weights. I was seeing a counselor. I was going to support groups. I made some really close friends in recovery, and we supported each other through our common struggle. Then in phase 2 of this program, they let me enroll in just 2 classes at a community college. I had failed every single college class I had ever taken, and now I got A's in both of these classes. Why? It was the first time I ever took a college class sober. Then in the final phase of this program, they made me a resident house manager, which just meant I was still a resident in the program, but trusted enough to watch over some of these younger guys. All these good things slowly started coming into my life, and it's because I was living a life in recovery. And that's not about just not using drugs and alcohol. It's about being a good person. It's about doing the next right thing. It's about helping other people. And because I lived this life, I was able to avoid prison because of it, and was offered a full-time job working at the same treatment program that I had gone to. And I remember I talked with the program director after I found out this amazing news, and he sat me down. He said to me, "You might have one more high left in you, but I seriously doubt you have one more recovery. Take this gift that you've been given and go do something extraordinary. Go use it to help a lot of people." And I haven't looked back ever since. I live my life in a completely different way today, and have a lot of people to thank for it. People who spoke up when things need to be said, and that applies here too. If you know somebody's kid is going down the wrong path and you speak up, it's okay if the parent reacts in a negative way. It's the #1 complaint I hear from parents all the time. I hear something about somebody else's kid, but when I call them out, they just go back at me and tell me to worry about my own kid. But I'm telling you, you do the right thing. Don't gossip about it. Just go directly to that person. I finally realized that there were so many great opportunities out there for me. So many ways for me to live my life without the use of drugs and alcohol. I do it every single day. I actually found a way to take all my pain and all my struggle, and I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. I found what my passion is, and it's doing this right here. Some studies say that one of America's #1 fears is public speaking more than anything else. I watch people miss out on great opportunities every single day out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure. Because other people believed in me first, it helped me believe in myself, and I was able to get past that fear. There was something I really wanted to do, and so I just went out there and did it. Just before I celebrated 2 years of recovery, I decided to leave my job with that treatment program and go back to college, majoring in criminal justice with the goal of going to law school one day, knowing how hard that would be for me because of my criminal history. But I gave it everything I had. I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and in my final semester, I started applying to law schools, studying for my law school admissions test, and at the same time, I decided to start this, Speak Sobriety. I wanted to share my story of recovery, especially with young people, in a way that was never presented to me when I was in middle school or high school or college, not knowing if even one school or coalition would ever agree to bring me in as a speaker. This is my 6th school year doing this officially, and I've had the opportunity to speak for almost 400 different schools and coalitions across the country. I recently graduated from Brooklyn Law School, took the bar exam, passed, and was sworn in as an attorney in New York. I published a book called A Journey to Recovery, actually with the help of one of my old SAT tutors. I got married this summer. I have my family back in my life. I have true friends who support me in what I do, and I support them in what they do. And I just gave birth, my wife just gave birth to our first child, Gianna, about 2 weeks ago. And I have all these amazing things in my life today because I live a life in recovery, centered around wellness, making smart choices, helping other people, and most of all, because somebody gave me a second chance. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, and now I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen. Wow, that was an incredibly powerful story, and it was very broad. I think my immediate reaction to it is that you really took us on a journey from where this starts to how it can progress to how you can climb out of it. And you made mention as well of the fact that a lot of people these days are not, in large part because of the fentanyl contamination and what's going on with that. And I agree with you 100% that there's never been a more dangerous time to have an addiction, and recoveries and prevention, both have never been more important. So my job now is to talk a little bit about what you just spoke about, which is, again, really tough to do. But there's a few points that I want to underscore and talk a little bit more about, and flesh out a little bit from my perspective as an addiction psychologist and someone who's working with patients right now, both adults, but then also teens, and who also I do a tremendous amount of education and speaking, which gives me windows into a lot of different worlds. And one of the biggest takeaways that I'm having right now, both from talking with people going through it, as well as from listening to the news, honestly, and looking at what's being published, is that we are about to enter into a very, very difficult time for addiction and young people. You probably, hopefully many of the people here this evening saw the story that the CDC recently did a survey and found that 39% of teenagers right now say that they're having persistent feelings of depression, and actually just under 20% contemplated suicide, which is shockingly high numbers. And the thing about substances is that they are at their core a coping strategy. It's a way of trying to solve a problem, and dealing with some sort of emotional burden is absolutely a problem that it seems like substances can solve, because in the short term, it might actually take that away. Long term, of course, there are tremendous life-altering consequences, and in the case of an overdose, in the short term as well. But it's something where, particularly when you have a brain that's not fully developed and you see what feels like a very quick solution to your problem, it's very easy to move in that direction. There was also, just within the last week, a study published that found that alcohol deaths are also up 25% in 2020, the most recent year that we have the data for, up to 99,000 people who died to alcohol-related causes. And actually, it was a 40% increase for young adults. They didn't have those numbers for teenagers. Young adults is from 18 to 25, but you don't like to see that percentage get higher as you go younger. Teenagers, I'm very concerned about what that's going to show as well. But that phrase, Stephen, that you used early in your presentation about one bad choice and your classmate lost her life because of it, with the drinking and driving, that could not be more true. And we're seeing that right now in death counts, both from alcohol, but then also from opioids. There was a study that was released within the past couple of days, actually, that projects, if we don't see change, that we're going to see 1.2 million people in this country die over the next decade from opioid-related deaths. And this all starts young. This all starts, there is a start to it. that first bad mistake, as Stephen puts it. This issue about how do young people go down this path is incredibly important, because what you heard from Stephen's story was he did not begin by buying pills off the street. He didn't start his journey with opioids. He didn't start his journey with cocaine. He started his journey with things that felt much more socially normative and socially acceptable, things that were legal, particularly in our state here in Illinois. Alcohol and THC, marijuana products now can be bought 21 and up legally. And I'm sure many of the people on at this presentation this evening have had experiences where you've talked to young people and they've given voice to the ideas that Stephen was talking about, that, you know, from those early years, that this is just what everybody does. We have a tradition in our school. This is how it's done. I know I've heard plenty of young people talk about how marijuana is, you know, everybody's doing it. It's legal anyways, so it must be safe. It's not a big deal. It's a quote unquote lighter drug, even though of course it's 7 times stronger now than it used to be, even in flower form. But what it does when a young person starts doing this, and this I think is a really critical component to how young people start down this path, is that it starts to shape their identity. And that's something that I heard very strongly from Stephen. I think that the phrase that he used was that he went to school to play sports and to use drugs, and the sports went away. So all that was left was the drugs. That was his identity. And so if you have a young person who's never used a substance before in their life, and now they're vaping THC products, all of a sudden they've made this jump from someone now who I am someone. This is what they're thinking, either consciously or unconsciously. I'm someone who gets high for fun. I'm someone who hangs out with other people who get high for fun. I will break the law when it suits me, which is what using these products under the age of 21 is. And so when you start incorporating that into your identity and then surrounding yourself with people who do the same thing, it creates this permission structure and it shifts your center. So now when you're at that party and there's the cocaine or there's the oxy or it's offered to you, it's a lot easier to say yes, because you've already taken those first steps. You've started to change how you see yourself, change what you think you do. I think Stephen put it very eloquently. If he'd known when he was 13 that he'd be convicted of a felony at age 24 and gone through everything that he went through, he never would have believed it, because there was such a huge gap between where he started and where he got to. And you don't cross that gap in one jump. You take it step by step by step. And the hard part, and I see this a lot when I speak with parents, is that they don't necessarily intervene in the early steps, or even better, they have not taken the time to speak to their kids about these subjects before they're exposed to it from their friends, because they're going to be exposed to these influences. They're absolutely out there. Whatever school your children are in, these influences are there. The question is not, are they going to be exposed to them? The question is when. And the really important question is, have you prepared them for it? And do they see it as something that's consistent with who they are and what they want to do? Study after study shows that parental opinion matters a lot. Even if it seems like it doesn't, when you express how you feel to your child, they are listening to you. They care about that. And so this is one of these, an ounce of prevention is so much more efficacious than a pound of, I mean, it's, if you can head this off before your child goes through even 20% of what Stephen just relayed to us, it is so much easier to extract. Because if you think about it, your friend's social, or rather your child's social milieu, that is like their whole world. And actually, when you think back to the beginning of Stephen's story, that's initially what hooked him in, right? That lacrosse captain, that was the person who said, I want you to sell this, right? And he's in those social environments and seeing other people do this and thinking, okay, well, I want to fit in, so I'm going to do this too. And so when that happens, when they see it as something that they can par that with their identity, and when they're in a social situation where they're getting that benefit, then all of a sudden now they're surrounded with people. Again, going back to Stephen's story, surrounding himself with the same people, the same situations, the same behaviors, you're going to get the same result. And so if you can work with your child before they're surrounded by these people, before they identify with these people, before that thought of, oh, great, it's the end of the day, I'm going to go to the parking lot of the Target and I'm going to go get high with my friends because that's just what I do. If you can get there early, it's so much easier than having to try to sell them something different, because ultimately that is what you're doing once someone starts to fall into this track. I mean, I'd be curious, and maybe in the Q&A, Stephen can speak to this, about if there's something as he started down that track that would have dissuaded him and what that might have been. But it's very difficult, I think, once again, someone feels like this is who I am. This is what I want to do. These are my people. My parents just don't understand. It's very difficult. And once you start getting into the dealing side of things, like he was speaking of, then all of a sudden it's tied up in your money. It makes you feel powerful. It gives you seemingly more freedoms. And so the idea of letting go of all of that, stopping dealing drugs, doing drugs, all of it seems almost inconceivable. And this all comes back to this aspect that it's actually not a solution to psychological problems, to social problems. It feels like it in the short term, because in the short term, maybe it is, right? What would have happened if you turned that captain down? I don't know, but it wouldn't have been good socially. And if someone's trying to numb out their problems, then yeah, getting high, getting drunk can do that. And that's the problem with addiction. It's like you're touching a hot stove, but instead of getting burned, it feels good at first. And then the pain comes like later, like the next day or after you do it for a while, where it's really easy to rationalize why, oh, that's not the real reason why there was a problem, or other people just don't understand. And then it's also got these chemical hooks in you that from a biological level start to change how you engage around the subject. So it's much easier if you can get to folks young, but if you can't, and someone's already starting down this track, it's so important to get in touch with professionals who can help guide you as to what needs to come next, to try to figure out, okay, what's driving this behavior and how do we really get to the root of it? So a couple final thoughts I want to share with you guys before I pass it on to Dr. Bolton. But the first one, just to underscore again, talk to kids early. If you are at this presentation and you have a young child, 4th grade, 5th grade, that is the best time to start talking about it, because that's before many of them are going to come into very strong contact with it. Start to shape their identity as someone who does not do things that hurt them, that they do not take those substances into their system. Other people might choose to, but really help them understand the full trajectory and the full narrative, not just that first part, where they might just see the benefit and not the harm. Coupled with this, I would encourage all parents, don't assume that your kid is not going to be the one who, like, don't think it's never going to be her. It's never going to be him. Because I can guarantee you there's a huge number of parents, maybe Stephen's parents included, who never would have thought that would have been what Stephen would do until he was already doing it, maybe even until he was so deep into it that all these consequences started piling up. And at that point, now you've got to undo all that work. So talk about it early. Also talk about it often. It's something, speaking to a colleague earlier today who made this point, I want to pass it along to you. As kids go through this process of exposure in school, they're going to have more and more experiences where they come into contact with these influences, with these substances. They're going to have more questions. You're going to need to be there to answer them. And if you don't, they're going to get it off of places you do not want them to get it from, like the friends who are supplying the substances, or someone on Snapchat, or someone on Discord. It's not where you want them to get that information. So don't assume this does not apply to your family. Third, have consistent boundaries and consequences. It's very difficult to just straight up punish someone out of this behavior, because as you heard, I mean, think about all that Stephen went through, and he was continuing along that path. What you actually have to do, you have to have those punishments. If someone's on the bubble, if someone's not fully deep into it yet, having those consequences to actions can help shape behavior, but ultimately you also have to understand why, which is the last component I really want to stress. There is a benefit that someone gets out of substance use, out of any behavior. People continue to do it. We do it repetitively because it does something for us. The people we hang out with, the foods we choose to eat, even things like substance use, even after people are getting punished, they're having these consequences. There's a draw that is so strong that might not just be a chemical addiction. For many people, again, it has to do with an identity issue, might even have to do with a psychiatric issue. But that draw and responding to that draw is so important that when someone comes face to face with losing relationships, having a criminal record, failing at school, they continue to choose it. You need to understand what that is in order to have any hope of selling them on a different solution, because ultimately that's always there. Whatever is going on with your child that they're trying to meet that need through substance use, there is another healthier way to do it. And if you can find what that is and you can show it to them, it's not an easy process. It's not a silver bullet, but that is critical, because intrinsic motivation, them knowing what they want and going out and getting it, is central to achieving lasting change. So thanks for letting me get on my soapbox for a minute. Thanks, Stephen, for your story. And I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Doug Bolton.
Aaron and Stephen, thank you. Tough act to follow. I learned so much already. I want to talk specifically about parenting and what it means to parent through addiction. And I thought that, Stephen, the story that your parents told in the video was really poignant for me. I could only imagine their pain. And I think what happens with addiction is we need to think differently about parenting than we ever have before. I think that this is what my guess is your parents had to think very differently about how to parent you as compared to your brother, because addiction derails everything and makes us make impossible decisions. And the decisions your parents had to make, and some was, do we send him, do we hire people to take him away in the middle of the night? For some families, these decisions are, do I use my child's college savings to be able to send him away to treat him or her away to treatment? I can't imagine how painful it was knowing what you were into to say you can no longer live here. The decisions that we have to make when facing addiction are impossible. And really, I feel like decisions parents never think they will need to make. And I wished parents never had to make some of these decisions. And it takes a unique kind of resilience. And I think that that's the other piece, is how do we build resilience so that we can work together in these moments? So I want to talk about three main themes today. First is partnership. The second is patience. And the third is community. And when we think about partnerships, one of the most important things we can do is to surround ourselves with the best possible people. Stephen's a lawyer. I loved hearing you earlier talk about what you're doing from a law perspective. Aaron, if I had a child struggling with addiction, I would want you on my team, making sure that we've got these partnerships, because what happens in these moments is the fear of our child struggling with addiction pushes us into our lower brain, pushes us into fight, flight, and freeze. And as a result, when we're in lower brain, we are not the best thinkers. We are not able to rely on our own thinking in these moments. We're not as good at listening. It's harder for us to be creative or flexible. My guess, Stephen, is your parents loved you like crazy. And yet in these moments when it was most frightening, it was hard to have empathy for you, especially when you were threatening things within your family. Our memory goes, our language, it's harder to find the words, or the words come out the way they did when Stephen spoke to his coach, right? And we also are more, we lose the ability to inhibit. We become much more impulsive, not just us as parents, but our child who is struggling so much with their own addiction. And so what puts us there is feeling disconnected, devalued, and powerless. And the challenge is that our kids in these moments feel disconnected from us. We feel devalued, and we're absolutely powerless. It feels incredibly powerless to not be able to support our child, to change our child's addiction behavior. And the child is feeling exactly the same way. One of the things that happens, both in terms of families and kids, for kids who are using, there's great secrecy and shame and silence. We keep it quiet. And the same thing happens with families. Stephen talked about families who say, don't tell me what to do and how to support my child. There's great shame in this. We want to keep this secret. And what happens is this undermines our ability to get the support we need, and we end up feeling like we've got to carry the load on our own. And it's a dangerous, dangerous thing when we take that approach. We build resilience through relationships. And so what we want to do is if your child is struggling with addiction or struggling with a depression and starting to use, what we want to do is create a team. It could be a clinician, it could be someone from the school, it could be their favorite teacher, it could be a coach, it could be parents that your child is using with, parents of the children's parents, whatever it is, whoever that team is, make sure you've got confidence in them. There is no one path through this parenting through addiction. There's no one right way to do it, and the path is always changing. And so having a team of people that you can trust, you can disagree with, you can be scared with, you can be angry at, having that team is really, really important. It's so hard when there's no easy answer to a complex problem, and there's never an easy answer to a complex problem. And the thing that can be most challenging is, as parents, we can polarize. One that says he needs more love, the other says he needs more consequences. And as a result, it becomes very, very hard to work together. This may be a time, if you're finding yourself at odds with your spouse, to get help, to make sure you're devoting time to trying to find the best possible solution, given that we don't know. Your child will need both. And how do we do both of those things? And then finally, can we partner with our child? And I know that in many ways they feel lost and gone, and yet it's so important that we continue to go back as often as we can to a model of partnership with them as much as we can, knowing that we're going to have to set limits on them, knowing that there are going to be painful conversations, but as much as we can, figure out what is their voice, how can we partner with the best aspects of themselves. One of the things that I think parents need to be ready for, and I liked, Stephen, when you talked about this, is the first use, the first time you find marijuana in their pocket, the first time they come home drunk, the first time you hear they were drinking at a party. What we want to do is we want to be ready for that. Parents may disagree. Some parents may say, well, it's just part of being in high school. Another parent may say they need treatment right now. What we want to do is make sure that as adults, we know what we're going to say and how we're going to say it when this time comes, so that we're ready for it. It doesn't catch us off guard. So we don't humiliate and punish and make sure that they'll never talk to us about it again, but they'll also know that this is serious. And can we be curious? What's happening? Why did you choose to use? Let's be curious. Let's understand what's happening for them. Why now did they choose to use? What was it about that? Can we be curious? And can we set the stage for these hard talks? And I liked, Aaron, what you were saying. This is all the prevention pieces. And what we want to do, part of setting the stage, is being able to have times where we're talking about things that we're ashamed of. We're talking about things that are hard for us, so that when our children are faced with something that's hard, faced with something they experience shame about, that they know that we can talk about it too. And for children who are into addiction, and you're feeling so lost, I think part of this is we need to be opportunistic. We need to know that at this moment, if they get arrested, we are going to have a treatment program ready for them, and we will have figured out how to get them there. If they're hospitalized, whatever that looks like. But what we want to do is we want to be one step ahead, because the systems that you've got to navigate are really tricky. Wait lists are tricky. And so making sure that if you're feeling out of control, knowing that something down the line is going to happen, and can we take full advantage of this? Getting kicked off the hockey team, whatever it may be, could be the thing, that moment of vulnerability that allows an opening for treatment. And as with Stephen's story, treatment seldom works the first time. It feels like a Sisyphean task, but we continue. Just because it didn't work completely the first time doesn't mean it didn't have an impact. And there are times in all of our lives that when we're learning new things and learning new skills and getting committed to things, that we learn a little bit more each time. It may take 3 or 4 or 5 rounds of treatment before they get there. All right, patience. This is a tricky one, but I think what we need to do is we need to be able to trust development. I had a teacher who said, a professor who said, development is always on our side. The teenage brain is still, when Stephen was 14, his brain was only, the prefrontal cortex was only half developed at that point in time. And it's amazing what this prefrontal cortex does, especially as it relates to the things we need to do to avoid drug use or to benefit from treatment. Robert Sapolsky, the neuroscientist, says, it makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. It makes you say no when you really want to use again. It makes you be able to say, I'm going to stay home with my parents tonight because I know people are going to have some oxy at that party. Whatever that is, it makes us do the harder thing. And what is that? It helps us control our impulses. It helps us with emotional regulation, ability to initiate tasks that may be hard, like homework, the ability to persist and transition and have empathy, maintain attention and plan, all of these things. But development has its own timeline, and that's one of the tricky things. And stress disrupts development. So as we add stress, as kids add stress into their lives, this part of their brain that we so want to develop is slower to develop. But the other thing about the adolescent brain is it's really plastic. So in the midst of all this, can we help that brain grow? And the things that help it grow the best are relationships, good, healthy relationships. All of us being emotionally regulated as much as possible, as much as this can be so hard to navigate. And engagement, this idea that they can engage in things that are healthy, that'll help them grow. At some level, after working with children at North Shore Academy, which is a therapeutic school, and we'd watch them struggle as 15, 16, 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, and they would come back. If they were able to make it through those early 20s, some of them, that's when we struggled with the overdose situation the most for those kids, was after they had left the supportive community and they were more out on their own. But it's amazing to watch what happened in their lives as they got older, as that brain developed and was able to do things and engage in different ways. But it's really hard to be patient. And that's one of the scariest things, is having to be patient when there's so much on the line. One of the things I have the gravy on the side because it's a metaphor for me. It's always the most stressful time of Thanksgiving for me. When the juices come out, the turkey comes out, they're carving the turkey, the juices are there, you've got your flour and your butter and you put the juices in and you're whisking, and it takes about 9 minutes for this thing to thicken. But after 4 or 5 minutes, I always think it's never going to happen. And I start to panic and I want to pour more and more flour in, which would only ruin it. It's hard to be patient, and yet that's our work. I like this quote by Yale doctoral who talks about writing, but I think parenting is the same way. Parenting is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. And that's our work, is to try and make the best decision we can right now. We can't predict where the future is, but we can get to that future if every step of the way we're doing the best we can. And then finally, healing happens in community. If you look at substance abuse treatment, it's all group-based, it's all community-based. And that's the key. It's helpful for parenting as well. Al-Anon and Alateen programs are incredibly helpful for parents. And can we help our kids find community? And this is the hard one because they've got a hard and fast using community. But can we find cracks in that? Can we help them connect to other people? And for Stephen, a lot of that community, my guess was that hockey team was his community and helped him in many ways. It didn't keep him from using, but boy, was that important. And boy, did it fall off when he lost that community. Bruce Perry says, in recovery, we need to help our children refill their reward bucket. And the healthiest way to do this is through relationships. Connectedness regulates and rewards us. Their brains are searching for reward, and we can give that to them. And the most powerful reward we can give is connection. And yet in our need for control and our desire for control and in our own dysregulation, we lose that greatest tool. And I know that this happens to me as a parent. And I know that when parents are dealing with something as frightening as addiction, this happens often. Many interventions used to treat substance abuse are punitive and increase distress. The pull to use gets stronger. Disconnection and punishment only make problems of substance abuse worse. And when we talk about, I agree with what Aaron was saying, but the key thing is we not punish by taking away resiliency enhancing things. We want to not punish by taking them away from activities and people that are so important for them. And it's this connection. How else except through connection can people be reminded of their goodness? And my guess is that, Stephen, you didn't feel a huge sense of goodness during the time that you were struggling, but each kid has this goodness in them. And then finally, can we help them feel engaged? For some people, it's sports, but this gives us a sense of purpose. What we want to do is we want to give them something to move towards. Aaron didn't feel like he had a life beyond death or prison. What we want is to have them have a sense of purpose, and we get that through engagement. This is one of our students. We engaged him, and he got sober through a mentor and a lot of things, but mentoring younger kids was his thing. Another student, same thing, but he loved welding. He was a much more private person. He didn't want to mentor anybody, but he learned to weld, and all of a sudden now he's a welder. And Josh, before, there was a student I showed you before, is a social worker working with kids. These are the things. There's more than one path. What happens is we believe there's one path, and then when we get off the path, we think, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But there are lots of paths through adolescence. There's lots of paths through addiction. And what we want them to be able to do is to see, just because they're off the path that we had all thought they were going to be on, wanted them to be on, but can we see a different future? Can we help them see a different future that they can then work for? Can they find hope, partnership, patience, and community? It's a long road, don't get me wrong, but what an important journey this is. And I'll end here, because it does take this sense of hope. Anne Lamott says, hope is a revolutionary patience. Hope begins in the dark, in the stubborn hope that if you just show up and try to do the right thing, the dawn will come. And we don't know what that right thing is, but we just do our best in every moment to show up the best way we can. You wait and watch and work, and you don't give up. And then all of a sudden, you watch Stephen telling his story after you kicked him out of your living room, after he got arrested in front of his grandmother, and all of a sudden you see him with his own child becoming his own parent. And that's our work, and it can happen. And that's our work, is to do that together. All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. You've given us so much to talk about. Let's get to some questions. Ashlyn, you are up first.
Hello, my name is Ashlyn Kasgard, and I'm a sophomore at Glenbard West High School. My question for you, Dr. Bolton, is how do I help a friend who is currently struggling with an addiction? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. You know, I might pass that one over to Stephen, if that's all right, because I think that Stephen's, I've got some ideas as a principal, but I think Stephen would have better ideas having gone through it and having had friends try and influence him.
Yeah, so hold on one second. I get asked this question so much that I created a guide for doing this. So I'm gonna share my screen again. Hold on one second. Let's do this.
Let me just say, Ashlyn, what a great question. And I appreciate the passion with which you shared that question.
Okay, so I get asked this question all the time. How do I help a friend I'm concerned about who's using drugs and or alcohol? even before start here, I talk about credibility, right? So if you're out there doing the same thing, if you're using drugs, you're using alcohol, you don't really have the credibility, right? If you ever seen the TV show Intervention, a lot of it's pretty accurate. And when you do an intervention, sometimes, not sometimes, you have to ask the people in the room, who here uses drugs, who here uses alcohol, and who here uses drugs and alcohol with the person we're about to do an intervention on. Because if you're in the hot seat and someone's calling you out on your addiction and you know that this person's using drugs and using alcohol, the first thing you're going to say is, who are you to tell me anything? Right? So by you simply not being part of the problem, you're putting yourself in a position to be part of the solution. What I tell people to do is pick a setting, right? Time and a place for a serious, in-depth, one-on-one conversation. Depending on how deep they are in their addiction, you got to try and find time when they're sober. Depending how deep they are, sometimes it's either somebody's using or going through withdrawals. If it's earlier on, you might try and find time where someone's sober and you can have that. My therapist called it a carefrontation. She said it's not a confrontation. You got to come from a place of care and concern. Be gentle with your words and give specific examples as to why you are concerned. Don't just say, generally, I'm concerned. Say, I see that your grades are going down. I see that you are not answering my phone calls anymore. I see you're hanging out with a group of friends who I know that all they do together is use drugs, right? So be specific with it. Listen to what they have to say. Sometimes people are just waiting to be called out. Sometimes people just desperately want someone to call them out on it. If the conversation goes well, be that support for them. Walk them to a school counselor. Go to a parent. It's not going to be the same. I don't say, always go to a parent or always go to a counselor. You have to make that choice yourself. Who do you think is in the best position to help this person? And go to that person. If it ends on a negative note, and I would say more times than not, they do, don't get discouraged. It's not your fault. Try and revisit the conversation. If your friend, right, if they make the positive change, that's great. If they don't, here are the things that prevent students from taking the next steps. One is damaging the friendship. People say, I don't want to speak up because if I speak up, then my friend's going to find out it was me and they're going to get really mad at me, and then it's going to damage the friendship. If you go to a counselor, a social worker, a psychologist, the benefit with going to somebody like that is they are bound by certain confidentiality laws. And so, let's just say it's somebody in school and you go to your school social worker, you can be very upfront with them and say, listen, I'm not here to get this person in trouble. I'm here to help them. And I don't want it coming out that it was me. They have to respect that. The only situations in which they won't do it is if you say that you're going to hurt yourself, someone's hurting you, or you're going to hurt someone else, right? Without any of those three situations, they have to keep it confidential. The other thing that I hear from students all the time is this universal term snitch or rat. And people say, I don't want to speak up because I don't want to be labeled a snitch or a rat as someone who tells on other people. But it's very important to understand that there's a big difference between being a snitch and a good friend, right? I work in criminal justice. I know what a snitch is. A snitch is someone who gets arrested, gets in trouble, and then they just get other people in trouble to save themselves. But if you speak up because you're genuinely concerned about someone, if you speak up and your motive is to help them, that just makes you a good person, makes you a good friend. Big difference between the two. Check your motives, check your intentions. Ask yourself, why am I speaking up? Am I speaking up to try and help this person? Because if you are, then you are doing the right thing.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Peyton, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Peyton Fermansky. I'm a junior at Glenbard High School. My question is, what do you wish parents knew when having the drug conversation with their teens?
Who wants to take that one? Aaron, how about you?
Yeah. So I want to make sure I don't repeat myself too much. I think that ultimately, the most important thing that parents should know when they have the drug conversation is that what they say matters. Kids are like sponges. They soak up. No offense to the teenagers on the call, but we're always looking at models, pretty much at any age, but particularly when we're young. And so if you are a sort of parent who's able to say, here's why I make the choices that I make in my life, here's why we're asking you to make these sorts of healthy choices, here are the consequences of these actions, that's heard. Again, depending on the relationship, maybe more or less oppositional. But the flip side of that was, if you were under the impression somehow that like actively like drinking or smoking in front of your kid is somehow going to socialize them to not use it dangerously in the future, that is untrue. Because that's just teaching them this is how we relax, this is how we have fun. It creates a permission structure, kind of like we were talking before, that actually is very unhelpful. So I guess I would really just land on the fact that what you say and what you project really matters, and don't sell yourself short. Even if you have a lot of confrontative interactions or it seems pretty tense, what you say matters.
Thank you.
I see there's also a note in the chat from Felicia, who works at Serenity House. She lost her son to an overdose, and she's offering up Serenity House as a resource for anyone who's listening. Let's see, Mira, you're up next.
Okay, hi, my name's Mira, and I'm a sophomore from Glenbard West, and I have a question for you, Stephen. So when did you realize that you had a problem with alcohol and you weren't just experimenting with it?
So I went through different phases throughout my addiction with my mindset on not just alcohol, I'll just say substance use in general, right? So one of the worst things looking back on it that could have happened my freshman year was really making it through without any negative consequence to really put on paper. Right, like I had a good family life, I had friends, I was doing well in school, I was excelling in sports. And so to me, my school or people who were talking about drugs and alcohol were doing one of two things. One, they were lying to me, or two, this did not apply to me. But sometimes it doesn't happen right away. And so then sophomore year, all of a sudden the negative consequences started coming in. And what I said to myself was, all right, I let it get out of control. I got to try and set limits for myself. And what I would do is I would say things like, I'll only drink and smoke on the weekends. I'll only do it if I don't have a test. And so I would set all these limits for myself. And then all of a sudden, those limits were gone to the point where I was doing it every day. And then I would try a pill. And I would say to myself, I'll only try this Xanax once. I'll only do it on the weekends. I will only do it during the week if I don't have a test that day. And so once I got to a point where I realized I could not control it, I knew it was a problem, but I was so deep into it at that point. And like Aaron and Dr. Bolton talked about, I'm 14, 15 years old. I'm a decade away from my brain fully developing, and you're sticking all these substances into my brain. I'm surrounding myself with negative influence. I knew it was a problem, but I did not care enough to stop. Once I got kicked off that school hockey team, then I really dove into it. Aaron talked a little bit about identity and how important that really is. And I ended up just finding my identity in drugs. And so I knew it was a problem, but I was like, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. And I didn't really care at 16. As I got older, I cared more and I knew it was a problem, but I didn't have the power to stop the show. It was almost like I was standing outside myself, watching myself do things that I didn't want to do anymore. And the mental obsession to use is so strong that even those brief moments of clarity that I would have where I wanted to stop, it wasn't enough for me. I needed to be willing to ask for help. I needed to go and get treatment. I needed that support group. Dr. Bolton talked about community. That was the most important thing for me, was making close friends in recovery as we supported each other through our common struggle. So to answer your question directly, I knew it was a problem sophomore year. I really knew it was a problem junior year, but didn't care. And then as I got older, I knew it was a problem. I wanted to stop, but the addiction was stronger than my ability to do so.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Naomi, you're up next.
Hello, I'm Naomi Friedman, and I'm a senior at Glenbard South High School. And my question today is just overall, what do you wish teens knew about drugs today?
Anybody want to take that one?
So I can take one of the most common questions I get asked as well is, if you can go back and tell your 13-year-old self one thing, what would it be? And it would be that I would not underestimate the power of drugs and alcohol. Nobody goes into this with the intention of becoming addicted. Nobody goes into it with the intention of making one really bad choice under the influence, right? You don't have to be addicted to suffer major negative consequences. Unfortunately, in my home county last year, we had 2 drunk driving deaths from students in the high school, where people are going to jail and prison, and 2 people are dead, and then other people who were in the car are traumatized forever, right? So you don't have to be addicted to it either. You can make all these promises with this sober brain. I'll never drink and drive. And this doesn't even just apply to teenagers. This applies to parents too. I know plenty of adults who say, I'll never drink and drive, and then they get drunk, and every single time they get behind the wheel of a car, right? Because you can make all these promises to yourself and you can think logically with a sober mind, but as soon as you put the substance into your body, into your brain, you're giving up the power of choice, right? And that's what happened to me. And not just being under the influence, then once you're addicted as well, now you're in double trouble, right? You're giving up the power of choice under the influence, plus your brain, even without the substance, is completely changed. And so now I'm at a point where I'm 10 years away from my brain fully developing. I'm under the influence all the time, and I'm addicted, and I had ADHD. I mean, you take all this stuff together, all the pressures and temptations and surrounding myself with negative influence. And when you really look at it from that perspective, is it a shock that I ended up with this story? To me, it's not. It's not that much of a shock, So that's one thing I would say is don't underestimate the power of it. And one thing that really stood out to me with both of their presentations, about shaping their identity, and I said talk early, right, and prepare yourself for that moment, right. So one thing I say to students and what parents should do for them is, to me, a lot of it's about self-confidence and self-esteem, right, and strength in numbers, people, place, and things, right. So I went to this party. I went to a place where a lot of people were using. And so I didn't have that self-confidence. I didn't have that self-esteem. And so when it was offered to me, I so desperately wanted to fit in. And I took it, not with the intention of becoming addicted, just with the intention of being cool, of fitting in, not knowing what was going to come after the fact. So being able to have strength in numbers, right? The people you hang out with. If there's 9 people who are not using and only 1 person is, well, you're a lot more likely to stay on that sober path, as opposed to if you're the 1 person who's not using and 9 of your friends are, you're more likely to give in to that. But when you are offered it, self-confidence, self-esteem, refuse with confidence. I'm literally talking about your body language, your tone of voice, your facial expressions. Be confident in your decision to do it. You'll feel better about it, and you'll deter that person from making fun of you and keep coming at you again.
Good advice. Good advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our last question of the evening goes to Aisha.
Hi, my name is Isha Shah. I'm a sophomore at Glenbard South. So, AP exams are coming up in a few weeks. It's a really stressful time for a lot of high school students. What suggestions do you have for teens to deal with stress as the end of the year approaches?
Aaron, Doug, want to take that
I
one?
got a thought, but Doug hasn't been able to field one yet. Doug, do you want to go for it?
Go, Doug.
Go ahead, and then I'll jump on if there's anything you've. This is kind of a huge deal. So yeah, I've got a couple things I'd like to say, but I'll hop on after you.
All right. Well, I'll just start with something very basic, and then we'll pass over to Doug. So stress is a system in your body like anything else. You have more inputs of stress. You have to process it and discharge it somehow. You can't just stuff it all down inside. That's part of where you get into trouble and where you start seeing these really maladaptive coping mechanisms like addiction, self-harm, eating disorders. That's where they all start to pop out. And so there's a lot of ways to actually process it through well. The two easy ones that I'm going to highlight that work for a lot of people, the lowest hanging fruit, if you will, are one, getting some exercise, like actual like cardiovascular exercise is a great way. One of the most research-backed techniques. It eventually won't snow in April and we can go outside and, you know, start to use the environment a little bit. If you have other ways to exercise, that's one. The other one, also using your body to your advantage, is if you haven't already learned how to do diaphragmatic breathing, like deep breathing, belly breathing, and then meditation. Both of those have very profound effects on your parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that calms you back down and brings you back to a resting state. You can activate that with 3 to 5 minutes, even as little as, and if you can push it up to more like 10, even better. You might be even surprised at how much that tension in your body goes down, how much your mind can slow. And there's great apps that you can download on your smartphone to help you do it. Some that are just straight up free, some that have free trials. Happy to recommend specific services if anyone's interested for that. But I'm going to go with the old standards: exercise, meditation, and deep breathing.
I love that. And I think that, with exercise, you don't have to go to the gym. It can be a 5-minute brisk walk can change your body chemistry that quickly. I guess the other thing that I want to say is that in 2019, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation identified just attending a high-achieving school as being a risk factor for mental health problems. There is something in the water in high-achieving schools that everybody believes that that finals, that AP exams are going to make or break our future. And if you take a look at all of the research on this, whether you go to a selective school or not, whether it's the impact of high-achieving schools and achievement on our happiness and success later on, it all falls apart. And so I guess that there's a piece of this that says, if you don't do as well as you think you want, as you think you should, it's not the life sentence that we as communities believe that it is. And in fact, many people who've struggled, and I'll just take a look at Stephen. I don't think you did so well on your AP exams.
I never took an AP class. I didn't qualify for any of that.
And I do think that there are people who they call it the hedonic treadmill, which is we just got to achieve more and more and more, and then we don't get a chance to stop and enjoy life. And I would use Stephen as an example that would say his path was very different than taking AP classes. And here he is, a lawyer, doing amazing things, talking around the country. And so I guess I would try and I would just take a look at the myth that we have about achievement in our cultures as being the thing that will get us happiness and success.
Lovely. On that note, there's so much here. I can't wait to share this out. Those of you that are listening, look to the Glenbard Parent Series YouTube channel. You will see this, and this is a recording you absolutely want to watch again and you want to share. Thanks to our speakers, thanks to our students. Your questions were outstanding. Thanks to the time that you gave us tonight, everyone. Be safe. Let's have a good, safe, and quiet end of the year. Thank you so much, everyone. Be well. Take care.